The White House is preparing to roll out its long-anticipated plan for Middle East peace. But with reports of Palestinian statehood being excluded, will this so-called deal of the century be dead on arrival? Hello and welcome to Bigger Than Five with me, Ghida Fakhry. After working for more than 2 years on a plan for peace between Israelis and Palestinians, US President Donald Trump's son-in-law and White House senior advisor Jared Kushner is set to unveil his long-awaited proposal in the coming weeks. Although the details have not yet been released, Kushner's plan is expected to focus primarily on security for Israel and economic development for Palestinians. Those familiar with it say it will likely enshrine Israel's control over the occupied territories while failing to ensure full Palestinian sovereignty. The newly re-elected Israeli Prime Minister says he will consider the plan, but the leader of the Palestinian Authority has been critical of what he calls the Trump administration's blatant bias towards Israel. As with previous failed attempts to broker peace, one of the thorniest issues remains the status of Jerusalem. What do those who live there think about the prospects for peace? We went to meet people on both sides of a divided city.
My name is Ahmed Muna and I'm 28 years old. I work in Salah ad-Din Street at the Educational Bookshop in East Jerusalem.
My name is Ella Stahl. I am 26 and I work in a small startup called Gamiti.
Jerusalem is my city. Jerusalem is where I feel home. And Jerusalem is the city that I grew up in. So, you know, when you tell me where's home, I normally say it's Jerusalem.
Well, Jerusalem's my home. It's always been my home. It's the only city in the world that I know quite well. And I grew up here. This is basically all I know.
The Nakba represents, and I guess not only to me, but to many Palestinians, the Nakba is, and to start with, actually, the Nakba means catastrophe in Arabic. And the Nakba is the reminder of every Palestinian of the destruction that the Palestinians went through in 1948. 750,000 people who left their houses and they were made refugees. The Nakba is a reminder that there was 514 villages that were destroyed. 30,000 people lost their lives.
Independence Day is a celebration day for me. We do barbecues. That's the main extent of it. It comes right after Memorial Day. So it does have some sad connections, and it does make me think about the people who have, you know, given their lives so that I can live here, you know, fairly peacefully.
It's not enough to have peace. We should be looking, when we talk about this, we should be looking at peace and justice. I think there's two things that come together, and peace without justice is not exactly peace. So peace for me is having dignity, having equality, having freedom, having basic rights.
I think the peace process has failed many times because it's complicated. There's a lot of emotions involved, there's religion involved, there's history, and, you know, every time you bring these complicated emotional things to the table, it doesn't always work out.
I think for peace to be achieved, first of all, we have to be serious about it. We're not really on an equal footing. We're not on an equal ground. I think for the Palestinians and the Israelis to actually want to be talking about peace, they need to feel equal at least. And at the moment, I don't think it takes a genius to discover that we're not on equal ground.
I think if we had peace, my day-to-day life wouldn't look that different. I'd still be studying, working, living in the same places. The one thing, though, that I think might change is that maybe we could all go everywhere. You know, there are places in Israel that I can't go, and there are definitely places in Israel that a lot of people, you know, a lot of Arabs or Palestinians, I don't really know enough to know where exactly, but I think maybe that would change, and there are places that I'm curious to see.
The current status quo for Israel is very good in the eyes of Israel, of course, in the eyes of the Israeli government, and therefore there's no incentive for a peace process. There's no incentive to come to a to the table with the Palestinians, because actually, if anything, for Israel to make a peace agreement, in Israel's eyes, it's a loss rather than a gain.
I think very smart people have tried to achieve peace here. It hasn't happened yet.
The peace plan that Trump is building, Deal of the Century, is consulted by with the Israelis, I happen to believe. I see that any peace plan that's going to come from this administration is not going to be good for the Palestinians. It's not going to be just for the Palestinians. I don't see how the Palestinians are going to agree.
So, does Trump's proclaimed deal of the century stand a chance? To discuss this, we're joined by Matthew Brodsky, who's advised the White House on Jared Kushner's peace plan. He's also a senior fellow at the Security Studies Group. Matthew Brodsky, his father-in-law, no doubt, raised the bar considerably when he said that Kushner would actually end up delivering the deal of the century. Kushner himself is much more low-key. He's been talking about an in-depth operational document. From what you know, what are we likely to get? The world's best deal ever? Or just a very long document?
I'm certain if you were to ask them, they would say that setting something up as the deal of the century is probably not the best way to manage expectations. However, I think what they've done is they've assimilated a lot of what has happened before, really figured out the lessons from before, and have put together a peace proposal, parameters, that addresses both the political side and, of course, the economic side, which they view as equally important.
But we don't know very much about the political side. What we know from the horse's own mouth is that the focus will be on security for the Israelis and economic aid and development for the Palestinians. That really does sound like it's going to fall far short from Palestinians' political aspirations, isn't it?
I think what they're looking to do is to basically make sure that the Palestinian future is brighter, safer, and better, and provide a pathway forward for them, which they have not had for decades, especially. And I think that's the main thing that they've been driving after, is that solutions are easier to come by if there is hope, and the hope needs to be pretty much manufactured with a plan, a peace plan that's put together, because those who have been saying that the status quo is not sustainable seem to keep saying that we're spinning our wheels in the same manner. And so
sure, but isn't that exactly what Jared Kushner intends to do? He is throwing statehood aside. He says, states, the notion of a state means different things to each side. That's what he himself said very specifically, that we decided that we were not going to talk about statehood, so we won't deal with the issue of states. So he is essentially throwing away what every US president in recent memory has been talking about, which is two states for the Palestinians and the Israelis living side by side in peace and security.
Since George W. Bush.
And if that doesn't exist, what is the key selling point then of this plan?
A better future for the Palestinians that would, at that point, essentially be far better than any that are currently within the region.
So throwing billions of dollars at the Palestinians and wishing the problem away without looking at the issue of occupation and how to end occupation, or even looking at the issue of settlements, which we know Jared Kushner has a very close relationship with the whole settlement community. He himself, as co-director of his family's foundation, we know between the years 2011-2013, donated tens of thousands of dollars to settlements. So what kind of concessions are we likely to get from the Israelis?
See, I think you are focusing perhaps a bit much on the terminology of the statehood aspect, when they've also been quite clear that they are going to be addressing the 5 core issues that are, that are there. And that, of course, is security, that's Jerusalem, that's borders, and more. Okay, so these are all things that are going to be in the plan. That's what they have said.
Well, you and I don't know. I imagine you're not privy to the details of the plan, though you've advised Kushner loosely. What do you know of the plan that we don't?
First of all, many people have advised them. They've actually done a really good job of seeking out the advice of people who have been practicing in this realm before, specifically during the previous peace processes, and with others. And they've assimilated all of that, and they figured out that if what has been tried now in 3 main efforts that the U.S. has led that culminated in offers for statehood, that if those haven't worked, now is the time to actually try something a little bit different.
But are we trying something different? Is he trying something different when, since 1993, since the Oslo Accord, this whole notion of aid and quote-unquote charity, financial aid, to Palestinians. It's what's been tried and tested. It hasn't achieved peace. So a lot of people are taking a very skeptical, not to say cynical, view of this.
Right. I think that we need to give the plan a chance. Obviously, people are very deeply invested in this as an issue. Everyone has an opinion on it. And in this media environment, especially in the United States, where it's fairly toxic, a lot of people tend to root for failure. And I think that's unfortunate. I think perhaps we should wait for the plan to actually come out, so then we know what's in the plan, and then we can look for ways to constructively engage in what's in there.
Pro-Israel voices here in Washington are actually urging President Trump to kill this plan before it even sees the light of day. They say it is not in America's best interest and it would simply embolden Netanyahu. Don't they have a point?
I don't think they have a point. And one could, of course, quibble on exactly how pro-Israel some of those groups are, in fact.
Well,
however,
the director of the Washington Institute for Near East Policy is one, Robert Satloff. He's been urging President Trump to actually do away with this deal, to not even bother with it, to shelve it before it even becomes an official plan.
I think that what he argues is, unfortunately, to keep the status quo as it is, essentially to preserve that as the edifice for which a future statehood would come about. I think what this administration is doing...
This is someone who's just recently interviewed Jared Kushner, in fact, just a few days ago, on this peace plan that most of us still don't know the details of. He says he believes it will set off a chain of dangerous events in the region, which many would argue would simply add to Trump's previous decisions on Jerusalem and the Golan, which haven't been necessarily in the best interest of the region.
I would hardly say that the decision on Jerusalem or on the Golan Heights has actually led to a major outcry within the region. I think, in fact, President Trump, with those decisions, kind of helped dispel some of the mythology around that. And of course, as they've said, having a peace plan, it needs to be based on realism. And what that is recognizing, of course, that Jerusalem does have a very strong connection to Jews, and that it's been the capital of Jews in ancient times. And of course, it has been the capital of Israel since its founding.
And as you well know, East Jerusalem, under international law, is supposed to remain that, a divided city, with East Jerusalem being the capital of a future Palestinian state, while West Jerusalem would be the capital of Israel. Matthew Brodsky, thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure.
Over the last 3 decades, there have been several attempts to reach a peace agreement between Israelis and Palestinians, but none of them materialized. As Haidari takes a look back at some of the key moments in the so-called peace process.
The first time Israelis and Palestinians held direct peace talks was at the Oslo negotiations in 1993. Signed in Washington, the Oslo Accords spoke of ending decades of conflict and paving the way for a two-state solution.
Today, the leadership of Israel and the Palestine Liberation Organization will sign a declaration of principles on interim Palestinian self-government. It charts a course toward reconciliation.
But the Oslo Accords were only partially implemented. Then in July of 2000, there were the Camp David talks, which centered on issues including borders, Jerusalem, and refugees. Both sides, however, could not reach an agreement, and what followed was the Second Palestinian Intifada, or uprising. In 2002, Arab nations led by Saudi Arabia introduced the Arab Peace Initiative. The plan called for Israel to withdraw to the 1967 borders and the establishment of a Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza Strip.
So my call to the Israeli people is the same call that His Royal Highness has said to them today. If you want genuine peace, you must respond in kind. Genuine peace will not come out of the muzzles of guns. It will come from the hearts and minds.
The plan, however, failed to materialize for its inability to address the main points of disagreement. A year later, the US, Russia, the European Union, and the UN, also known as the Quartet, unveiled the roadmap for peace. It set a detailed timetable for a final comprehensive settlement of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict by 2005.
This is a hopeful and promising moment for both Palestinians and Israelis. They both deserve the full support of the international community.
But that timetable was not met. The last attempt to reach a deal was initiated by US President Barack Obama in 2009 and again in 2013. A key component of the talks was putting a partial freeze on Israel's illegal settlements.
All the parties involved have to take seriously obligations that they previously agreed to. There is no reason why we should not seize this opportunity.
The negotiations subsequently failed to persuade either side in resuming talks. And now in 2019, Trump's son-in-law and senior White House advisor Jared Kushner will unveil his long-awaited so-called deal of the century.
This has been stuck for, a long time. There hasn't been a lot of fresh ideas. There hasn't been any breakthroughs in a long time. And the reality is that the situation is getting more and more untenable. I think what we'll put forward is a framework that I think is realistic. It's based on, it's executionable, it's executable, and it's something that I do think, will lead to both sides being much better off.
So then, could this latest attempt by Jared Kushner succeed where others have failed? I'm joined by Khalid El-Guindi, non-resident fellow at the Brookings Institution and author of Blind Spot, America and the Palestinians from Balfour to Trump. I'm also joined by Harley Lipman, a member of the American-Israel Public Affairs Committee's National Council and president of the board of the Institute for the Study of Anti-Semitism and Policy. Welcome to you both. Khalid El-Guindi, to you first. According to Kushner, we are going to see what he says will be a basic but realistic proposal. No statehood for Palestinians, no army, no control over Jerusalem from what we know. But nonetheless, shouldn't the Palestinians give this a shot?
Well, you just pointed out that all of the main issues that Palestinians care about, Jerusalem, statehood, refugees, are basically all off the table. And so there isn't really much reason for the Palestinian leadership to take it seriously.
But should they have perhaps a counter offer? I mean, do they have an alternative?
Well, the alternative in the mind of this Palestinian leadership is to pursue a two-state solution, to pursue an independent sovereign Palestinian state based on the 1967 borders, eventually with Jerusalem as its capital through whatever means it could. Up until the Trump administration, it was through a US-led peace process. Now that leadership is looking at other means, whether it's the United Nations, the help of Arab states or other third parties, to try to achieve that goal.
A two-state solution, does that sound like the kind of thing Harley Lipman, the Israelis, want as well?
Very much so.
You say very much so,
Yes.
but beyond a stated policy, what we know from the statements that Netanyahu himself has made all the way back in 2001 in remarks that he didn't know were being recorded, he admitted that he had been working, quote, to put an end to the Oslo Accord ever since he first came to power in 1996. In fact, he also made another statement that seems to go against what you've just said. He says that he was gaming the Oslo Accord all these years, that he was only pretending to go along with it and the idea of a two-state solution, when he knows very well what America is and that he can move America in whichever direction he wants on this.
Well, whatever politicians say when they're running for election is one thing, but the stated policy of the Israeli government is a two-state solution. And I think if the Palestinian leadership were to recognize a Jewish nation as being Israel, I think there'll be peace immediately. Israel would be delighted to have a friendly neighbor like they have with Jordan and Egypt. So I think that's the heart of the problem. It goes back to Arab rejection of a Jewish nation in Israel. And I
well,
think
the Arabs, to be clear, did not reject the notion of an Israeli state. In fact, they put this on the table in 2002. What they had an issue with was the idea of recognizing a Jewish state. Why would Israel insist on being recognized as a Jewish state?
Well, because there are two peoples in the region that have legitimate rights to the land. The Jewish people have a right to the land for 3,000 years. There have been a continuous Jewish presence in Israel, and that can't be denied.
What about
and
the more than 20% non-Jews who live in Israel?
Palestinians also have a legitimate right to that land. That's why that's why you need a two-state solution. It's almost like a divorced couple that have to live in the same house. It's very difficult, but I think it's achievable. But I think you have a Palestinian leadership that's revolutionary, that prefers confrontation with Israel than statehood, schools, hospitals, and what normally a state has.
Is that the reality, the way you see it? Is this a genuine effort at peace, Khalid El-Guindi?
I mean, it's not how I see the Palestinian leadership at all. Mahmoud Abbas is anything but a revolutionary leader. He is quite invested in a diplomatic process. He has said repeatedly that an armed intifada would be a disaster for Palestinians, and that in the past it has been. And he's committed to diplomacy and nonviolence to achieve a two-state solution, to achieve an independent Palestinian state. So I don't know, that's not a characterization that I think.
Yet hasn't Mahmoud Abbas in a way been an impediment to peace, an obstacle to peace? He's been in office for 15 years now, although his 4-year term expired a good 10 years ago. Yeah. Should he give someone else the chance, another generation of Palestinian leaders, the chance to take this forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of problems with Mahmoud Abbas's leadership, and I think if and when he does pass from the scene, he will probably most be remembered for the division that exists between Gaza and the West Bank. And so a future Palestinian leadership, I think, will have to tackle that internal problem really before it can do anything else.
Many people are looking at this whole peace deal, this peace plan that Jared Kushner will certainly unveil very soon, looking at it with a lot of skepticism. For all this talk of peace, they see it as a guise, as a ruse to get the Palestinians to reject the proposal in order to allow Netanyahu to annex the West Bank, as he said he would do.
Well, I don't think he's going to actually annex the West Bank. Remember, he said that during the election, campaign, and I think that's unlikely, in my opinion. But I do think that, as Abba Eban, the foreign prime minister of Israel in the past, had said, the Palestinians never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. If I were advising the Palestinians, and I feel very sorry for them, and I feel that they deserve their own country, and I think they have terrible leadership, I would tell them to take something and establish something for themselves.
But isn't that another myth, that the Palestinians are the ones who always walk away from a good peace?
Of course it's a myth, but it's one that gets a lot of traction in Washington. The reality is that the current solution that everyone is talking about, a two-state solution, was actually put on the table by Yasser Arafat and the PLO starting in the 1970s. And it took almost 20 years for the United States and Israel to finally come around to what they now call the only game in town. We hear this phrase very often about a two-state solution. The reality is that up until the year 2000, American policy was adamantly opposed to the idea of a Palestinian state. And up until 2003, Israel was opposed to independent statehood. So there were plenty of opportunities in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s that were missed not by the Palestinians, but by Americans and Israelis.
What about Arab states? What about their responsibility, their complicity? States like Egypt, like Saudi Arabia, who many would argue have completely sold out on the Palestinian cause.
The Arab states have a role to play, for sure, but it's a support role. It's not a leading role. Historically, they've played a supportive role, supporting the Palestinians, giving them some strategic depth, supporting the process. Egypt has very often been an intermediary between Israel and the Palestinians.
I don't think the Arab states have sold out the Palestinians. I think the Palestinians sell out themselves. There's no sense of compromise. They want the right of return, so they want to flood Israel with Palestinians, which will destroy the
again,
Jewish
talking
nation.
Points. Okay, we've seen time and time again in every serious negotiation that has taken place between Israelis and Palestinians, much to the chagrin of the majority of Palestinians, the Palestinian leadership, whether it's Yasser Arafat or Mahmoud Abbas, have been repeatedly willing to compromise on the issue of Palestinian refugees. So that's never been an issue.
Even if you're right, let
me just ask you what concession the Israeli side is willing to make or has made.
Okay, I'll give you a great example. Ehud Olmert was willing to give back not only 100% of the West Bank, but even more land to give Abu Mazen a bigger victory. They rejected it.
Talk to me not about what he was willing to do, but about what he did.
The Annapolis process, they didn't reject it. Mahmoud Abbas made a counter proposal and had a list of questions that he put to Ehud Olmert that were never answered. To clarify various aspects of his proposal. And at the same time, he put on the table his own proposal that the Israelis simply ignored. So, if we're going to talk about the realities, we have to deal in the facts and not just talking about.
Well, if you want to deal with the facts, here's my response to that. You had said earlier that Mahmoud Abbas has renounced violence, but they support a martyrs fund where they pay Palestinians to kill Jews, and the more Jews you kill, the more money you make.
I don't think we're going to resolve this issue by going down this road. Let me just ask you both finally. Let me just ask you both finally. What do you see this deal, this peace plan, achieving in the long term for the Palestinians, for the Israelis? To you first.
I mean, if this plan is put forward, I think there won't be any real surprises. We don't know the details, but we know the broad outlines. Jerusalem is not on the table. Palestinian sovereignty and statehood
with you. We'll see.
is not
Jerusalem
on
is
the
on
table.
the table.
And Palestinian refugees is not on the table. The only things that are really on the table are what size the cantons of Palestinian autonomy will be, and how much economic assistance is supposed to be coming in from Arab states.
Harley Lipman,
so there's nothing
is this
really
a deal that
new
even
there.
stands a chance?
It's a very difficult deal. I think very candidly both sides have problems with it. I don't know if it really addresses the issues.
Harley Lipman, Khalid Al-Ghindi, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.
So whether Kushner, a political neophyte, succeeds where several seasoned US presidents have failed will depend on what's in it for the Palestinians and their key regional backers. Will they forego their decades-old aspiration for an independent state, or will they be forced to walk away? And now, with two of his staunchest advocates in the White House, Netanyahu knows that he can keep the US administration moving in his direction while he continues to play the long game. From me, Ghida Fakhry, and all the team here in Washington, thanks for watching. See you next time.